The crowd's collective breath caught as Mason's small hand pressed against the thick glass barrier. On the other side, the massive silverback gorilla's dark eyes locked onto the boy with an intensity that sent shivers through the onlookers. 400 pounds of primal power moved with surprising grace as Atlas approached the divide, his enormous frame casting a shadow that engulfed the 7-year-old child. Parents instinctively pulled their children back, hushed warnings spreading like wildfire through the observation area. A security guard's hand moved to his radio, ready to call for backup. But Mason didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Something in those ancient eyes held him captivated, rooted to the spot as surely as if the concrete beneath his sneakers had swallowed his feet. When Atlas raised his massive leathery palm and pressed it flat against the glass directly opposite Mason's tiny hand, the zoo fell silent in breathless anticipation of what would happen next. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. "Come away from there, honey," a woman whispered urgently, reaching for her son's shoulder. But Mason Harlow remained still, his small frame dwarfed by the impressive silverback gorilla, standing just inches away, separated only by reinforced glass. Around them, the Brookfield Zoo's great ape house hummed with tension. Visitors who had been casually strolling through the exhibit now clustered together, smartphones raised to capture the unusual standoff. Atlas wasn't behaving like himself. The 15-year-old silverback normally retreated to the far corners of his habitat when crowds gathered, preferring the shade of artificial rock formations to the scrutiny of human eyes. But today, something had drawn him forward, straight to this one particular child. "Is this normal?" someone whispered. "Never seen anything like it," another replied. Eleanor Reynolds, senior keeper with 15 years at Brookfield, moved closer to the viewing area, her experienced eyes narrowing as she observed the interaction. She'd known Atlas since he arrived as a juvenile, had catalogued every habit and preference. This behavior wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Mason's mother, Olivia, hovered uncertainly beside him. "Mason, sweetie, I think we should move along now." Her voice carried a nervous edge as her gaze darted between her son and the enormous primate. But Mason didn't respond. The slight, sandy-haired boy remained transfixed, his blue eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Atlas hadn't moved either. The silverback maintained perfect stillness, his massive hand splayed against the glass, a mirror image to Mason's much smaller one. Then it happened. Atlas raised his other hand and tapped the glass, once, twice, 3 times, a deliberate, measured rhythm that no one could mistake for random movement. He paused, then repeated the sequence. A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. "Did you see that? He's communicating. Someone should get him away from there." Eleanor's pulse quickened. The tapping pattern niggled at her memory, something familiar, yet just beyond her grasp. She'd spent her career studying great ape behavior, and this wasn't typical gorilla conduct. This was something else entirely. From the corner of her eye, she noticed her colleague, Tyler, reaching for his walkie-talkie, no doubt preparing to call in additional staff as a precaution. She raised her hand slightly, signaling him to wait. Atlas tapped again, the same distinct pattern. Then, to everyone's amazement, Mason lifted his free hand and tapped back, mimicking the sequence perfectly. The gorilla's expression changed subtly, a softening around the eyes that Eleanor recognized as recognition. Something registered deep within her professional knowledge, a connection forming between scattered data points. "Mason," Olivia pleaded, her voice more insistent now. "Please, let's go see the lions." But her son seemed locked in a private communication with the massive silverback. Atlas shifted his weight, moving even closer to the glass, his breath fogging the barrier between them as he leaned in to study the child more carefully. "Eleanor," Tyler called quietly from behind her, "should we intervene?" She shook her head slightly, unable to pull her attention away from what was unfolding. "Not yet," she whispered. "Something's happening here." Atlas moved his hand away from the glass, and for a moment, Eleanor thought the unusual encounter might be ending. Instead, the gorilla raised 2 fingers, then made a slow, sweeping motion with his entire hand before repeating the tapping pattern. Mason tilted his head, his expression curious rather than frightened. And then, impossibly, his small lips curled into a faint smile of recognition. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The gesture sequence, the rhythmic tapping. The particular way Atlas held Mason's gaze, it wasn't random. It wasn't typical gorilla behavior. It was familiar. She took an involuntary step backward, decades of training and experience crystallizing into a single, stunning possibility. Without a word to her colleagues, Eleanor turned and bolted toward the staff area, leaving confused whispers in her wake. She had to check the archives, because if her suspicion was correct, what they were witnessing wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Unless Atlas remembered. Unless the gorilla was recognizing someone he hadn't seen in years. Eleanor's footsteps echoed through the staff corridor as she raced toward the administration building, her mind racing even faster than her feet. 15 years at Brookfield Zoo had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now every fiber of her being screamed that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Something that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she burst into the records room, a sterile space lined with metal filing cabinets and shelves of binders. The zoo's digital archiving project had been ongoing for years, but the older records still existed in physical form, tucked away and largely forgotten. Come on," she muttered, scanning the labeled sections. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled open a drawer marked Special Programs 2017-2020. Eleanor had arrived at Brookfield with a fresh zoology degree and boundless enthusiasm in 2010. She'd worked her way up from junior keeper to senior staff through budget cuts, management changes, and the constant evolution of zoological practices. The memories flooded back as she rifled through the files, each folder representing a chapter in her professional life. There it was. A thick binder with a faded label, Interspecies Therapy Program, discontinued. She pulled it out, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Images flashed through her mind as she set the binder on a nearby desk. The innovative program had been Brookfield's attempt to combine animal enrichment with therapeutic intervention for trauma-affected children. It had shown remarkable promise before funding was cut. "Please be here," she whispered, flipping through pages of reports, evaluations, and participant records. Her hands froze on a particular page. A photograph showed a much younger Atlas sitting near the glass division of a special interaction area. Across from him, a small boy with sandy hair and blue eyes pressed his palm against the barrier. The date stamp read, May 14th, 2019, just over 6 years ago. The child's name was clearly typed beneath the photo, Mason Harlow, age 2. "Oh my God," Eleanor breathed. She quickly scanned the accompanying notes. Subject demonstrates exceptional receptiveness to nonverbal communication patterns. Atlas shows unexpected adaptive behaviors, mirroring child's gestures and developing consistent interaction sequences. Further pages detailed the specific patterns they had established, including the distinctive tapping sequence Eleanor had just witnessed in the exhibit. More photos showed Mason's progress over several months. In one, the toddler was tapping the glass in the exact pattern Atlas had just demonstrated. In another, Atlas was making the two-finger gesture followed by a sweeping motion, precisely what Eleanor had seen minutes ago. She flipped to the program termination report. Despite promising outcomes, funding reallocation necessitates immediate discontinuation, all participants to be notified. A handwritten note in the margin caught her attention. Mason Harlow, final session uncompleted due to family relocation. Eleanor sat back, her mind reeling. The boy in the exhibit wasn't just any child. He was one of the program participants. And Atlas, against all scientific expectation, had recognized him after 6 years. Not just recognized him, but remembered their specific interaction patterns. She gathered the most relevant documents and the photo, tucking them into her tablet case. As she hurried back toward the great ape house, questions swirled through her mind. Did Mason remember? Did his mother know the significance of what was happening? How was it possible that a gorilla could maintain such specific memory over such a long period with no reinforcement? When Eleanor burst back into the exhibit area, she was breathing hard from her sprint across the zoo grounds. The crowd had grown even larger, zoo visitors packed 3 deep around the glass barrier. Security staff had arrived but seemed uncertain what action to take, if any. Mason and Atlas remained in their silent communion, the boy now sitting cross-legged on the floor, the massive silverback mirroring his posture on the other side of the glass. They were taking turns with the tapping sequence, like old friends sharing a familiar game. Eleanor spotted Mason's mother standing anxiously to the side, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. She approached the woman carefully, not wanting to disturb the extraordinary scene unfolding. "Excuse me?" Eleanor said quietly, extending her hand. "I'm Eleanor Reynolds, senior primate keeper. Are you Mason's mom?" The woman nodded, not taking her eyes off her son. "Olivia Harlow?" "What's happening? Should I be worried?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Mrs. Harlow, has Mason ever been to Brookfield Zoo before today?" Olivia hesitated, her expression shifting subtly. "Yes, a long time ago when he was very little." Eleanor opened her tablet case and carefully extracted the photograph. Was he part of a special program here? With the gorillas! Olivia's eyes widened as they fixed on the photograph. Her hand trembled as she took it. How did you… Yes, he was. After the accident, when he wouldn't speak. But that was 6 years ago, Eleanor finished quietly. They both turned to look at Mason and Atlas, still engaged in their silent conversation across time and species. Mrs. Harlow, Eleanor said gently, I think Atlas remembers your son. Olivia Harlow's world had tilted on its axis the moment the zookeeper showed her that yellowing photograph. Standing in the middle of the crowded great ape house, watching her son communicate with a 400-pound silverback gorilla through a language of taps and gestures, memories she'd carefully packed away came flooding back. I never thought he'd remember, she whispered, her eyes never leaving Mason. The doctors said he was too young, that the trauma would erase everything from before. Eleanor guided Olivia to a nearby bench where they could still observe Mason and Atlas while speaking privately. Around them, zoo visitors continued to film the extraordinary interaction, but security staff had established a respectful perimeter. Tell me about him, Eleanor said gently. About Mason. Olivia took a deep breath, gathering herself. We live in Oak Park now. He's in 2nd grade at Whittier Elementary. Good student, but quiet. So quiet. She twisted the wedding band she still wore. The teachers say he has trouble connecting with other kids. He's always been different since the accident. The accident. Eleanor had seen the brief mention in the file, but waited for Olivia to continue. My husband, David, was driving. Mason was in his car seat. A truck ran a red light. Olivia's voice became mechanical, as if she'd rehearsed these sentences many times. David died instantly. Mason wasn't physically hurt, but he stopped speaking, completely. For months, 6-year-old memories crystallized in Eleanor's mind, snippets from the program notes about selective mutism resulting from trauma. That's why you came to the therapy program, Eleanor prompted softly. Olivia nodded. We tried everything: traditional therapy, play therapy, art therapy. Nothing worked. Then our pediatrician mentioned this experimental program at Brookfield. I was desperate. A faint smile crossed her face. The first day we came, Mason showed more interest in Atlas than he had in anything since the accident. At the glass barrier, Mason had shifted to sitting with his legs crossed. Atlas, with surprising gentleness for his massive frame, mirrored the position. The silverback's eyes never left the boy. We came twice a week for nearly 6 months, Olivia continued. The change was remarkable. Mason began making sounds again, then words. The therapist said something about how the pressure to communicate with humans was too overwhelming for him, but with Atlas. She gestured toward the pair. With Atlas there was no pressure, no expectations, just connection. Eleanor nodded. Great apes can provide non-judgmental interaction. For some children, that's incredibly healing. When the program ended suddenly, we were devastated, but we'd already seen such progress. Olivia twisted her hands in her lap. Then my mother got sick in Cleveland. We moved to help care for her, and I thought maybe a fresh start would be good for us. And Mason Eleanor asked. "Does he remember any of this?" Olivia shook her head. "He doesn't remember anything from before he was 3. The doctors called it childhood amnesia, compounded by trauma. I've shown him pictures of his father, told him stories, but he has no personal memories." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never mentioned the therapy program. I wasn't sure how to explain it, and then it just seemed like part of the past." Eleanor watched as Mason tapped out a complex sequence on the glass. Without hesitation, Atlas responded with the identical pattern. "Well," Eleanor said quietly, "it seems like part of his past remembers him." Nearby, Tyler approached with Dr. Marcus Wells, the zoo's director, in tow. The older man's furrowed brow suggested he'd been briefed on the situation. "Mrs. Harlow," Eleanor said quickly, "I'd like to introduce you to our director. This is quite an unusual situation, and we might need to—" "Mom!" Mason's voice rang out, the first word he'd spoken since the encounter began. Both women turned immediately. Mason was looking at them, his face animated with excitement. "Mom, he remembers the games. I don't know how I know them, but my hands do." Olivia moved swiftly to her son's side, kneeling beside him. "You remember the games?" Mason shook his head, confusion crossing his features. "Not really, but when he does this—" He demonstrated the tapping pattern. "I just know what to do back." Dr. Wells cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harlow, I'm Marcus Wells, Brookfield's director." "This is quite an extraordinary situation. Would you and your son be willing to come to my office? I believe we have much to discuss." Olivia hesitated, looking back at Atlas, who remained watching them intently. "He'll be here," Eleanor assured her. "Atlas isn't going anywhere." Mason stood reluctantly, his palm still pressed against the glass. "Can I come back?" Dr. Wells exchanged glances with Eleanor. "Young man, I think this is just the beginning of something very special." As they walked away, Atlas watched until they were out of sight. Then the massive silverback rose to his full height, placed his hand once more against the glass where Mason's had been, and let out a soft, rumbling sound that Eleanor had rarely heard him make. It sounded, to her trained ear, almost like longing. Morning light filtered through the canopy of artificial foliage in the great ape house. Atlas sat motionless near the rear wall of his enclosure, his massive frame silhouetted against the painted mural of an African forest. To the casual observer, he appeared to be resting, but his dark eyes remained fixed on the visitor entrance. He had been this way since opening, the keeper notes reported. Waiting. Inside the administrative wing of the Brookfield Zoo, Eleanor Reynolds sat across from Dr. Marcus Wells, her tablet open to the digitized records of the interspecies therapy program. "This goes against everything we understand about great ape cognition," Dr. Wells said, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. "Long-term recognition of a specific human after 6 years of separation with no reinforcement, and recollection of trained behavioral patterns." "It's unprecedented," Eleanor nodded. "I've reviewed every paper on gorilla memory and social recognition. The closest parallel is Coco's reported response to former caretakers after years apart, but nothing this specific or complex." "And you're certain these patterns match the program records?" Eleanor swiped through her tablet to display side-by-side video comparisons. The tapping sequence is identical, so are the hand gestures. These weren't random behaviors. They were communication tools developed specifically for Mason during his therapy. Dr. Wells leaned back in his chair, his scientific skepticism battling with what the evidence clearly showed. Atlas was what? 9 years old when the program ran. Yes, Eleanor confirmed. Still adolescent, but already showing unusual cognitive abilities. That's why he was selected for the pilot program. Across the zoo grounds, in a quiet observation room normally reserved for researchers, Mason sat with a child psychologist brought in at Dr. Wells's request. Olivia watched through a one-way mirror, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding something fragile together. "Can you tell me what you felt when you saw Atlas yesterday?" the psychologist asked gently. Mason considered the question, his small face serious. "Safe," he finally said. "Like when you meet someone you know is your friend, but you can't remember why." Back in his enclosure, Atlas moved at last, approaching the familiar spot near the viewing glass. The morning crowd was thin, a school group, a few tourists, a mother with a stroller. None of them were who he was looking for. He pressed one large palm against the glass, held it there for several seconds, then returned to his waiting position. "His behavior has changed dramatically," Tyler reported to Eleanor when she returned to the great ape house. "Look at these activity patterns from the last 24 hours compared to his baseline." He showed her a chart on his tablet. More time at the viewing area, less foraging, significantly increased scanning behavior. It's like he's searching for something. "Not something," Eleanor corrected softly. "Someone." In the decades since great apes had been studied in captivity, researchers had documented countless examples of their intelligence, tool use, rudimentary language acquisition, emotional complexity. But memory, especially emotional memory tied to specific individuals across years of separation, remained poorly understood. Eleanor thought back to her early days at Brookfield, when she'd first started working with Atlas. He had arrived from another facility, already showing signs of the depression that often plagued captive gorillas. Intelligent, sensitive, but withdrawn. The therapy program had changed him. Working with the children, especially Mason, had awakened something in the silverback that traditional enrichment never touched. After the program ended, Atlas had gradually retreated into himself again. His caretakers noted the decline in his engagement, but attributed it to the natural progression of captivity. Now, Eleanor wondered if they had missed something fundamental about his emotional life. By afternoon, Dr. Wells had convened an emergency meeting with the zoo's board of trustees, explaining the extraordinary situation and requesting permission for a controlled reunion. "I understand your scientific interest, Marcus," said Barbara Kenwood, head of the board. "But what about the child? What's best for him in all this?" "That's why we've brought in Dr. Levine," he replied, gesturing to the psychologist. "She's been assessing Mason all morning." "And?" Barbara prompted. Dr. Levine folded her hands carefully. "Mason displays no anxiety about Atlas. Quite the opposite. He shows genuine excitement and curiosity. His mother reports that he's been more animated since yesterday than she's seen in months. From a psychological perspective, I see potential benefit in exploring this connection, provided it's handled with appropriate safeguards. By late afternoon, the decision was made. Under controlled conditions, with appropriate safety protocols, Mason would be allowed a special visit with Atlas. As Eleanor walked Olivia and Mason back toward the great ape house, she noticed the boy's hand tapping rhythmically against his thigh, the same pattern he had shared with Atlas. "Will he remember more of our games?" Mason asked, looking up at Eleanor with earnest blue eyes. "I think he remembers all of them," she answered honestly. "Atlas has been waiting for you." When they rounded the corner to the special interaction area, a space not visible to the public, with a larger, lower glass partition, Atlas was already there. The massive silverback sat just inches from the glass, his breathing slow and measured. The moment Mason appeared in the doorway, Atlas's entire demeanor changed. His posture straightened, his eyes widened, and a low, rumbling sound emerged from his chest. "That's his happy sound," Eleanor whispered to Olivia. Mason walked forward slowly, as if in a dream, and sat cross-legged before the glass. Without hesitation, Atlas mirrored him, their eyes locked in mutual recognition that transcended species and time. And then, in perfect synchrony, they began to remember together. Dr. Marcus Wells paced the length of the conference room, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his balding head. Around the oval table sat the crisis management team he'd hastily assembled. Eleanor Reynolds, Dr. Amelia Levine, the zoo's legal counsel Janet Friedman, and Tyler Chen, Atlas's primary caretaker. "The board's approval is conditional," Dr. Wells said, tapping a stack of papers against the table. "One supervised session, documented for research purposes only, not publicity. After that, we reassess." He fixed each of them with a stern gaze. "This is completely uncharted territory, people. We're literally writing the rule book as we go." Eleanor glanced at her watch. Mason and Olivia were waiting in the visitor lounge, and she'd promised them an update by noon. "Marcus," she said, using his first name deliberately, "I understand your caution, but we need to consider what's best for both Mason and Atlas. This isn't just a scientific curiosity, it's potentially therapeutic for both of them." Janet Friedman cleared her throat. "And potentially a massive liability. I've drafted special waivers for Mrs. Harlow to sign, but I want to be clear. The legal precedent for this kind of interaction is non-existent." Dr. Levine, who had spent the morning with Mason, leaned forward. "From a psychological perspective, I believe the benefits outweigh the risks. Mason shows no fear of Atlas. In fact, his drawings from this morning's session suggest he views the gorilla as a protective figure." She slid several crayon sketches across the table, childish renderings of a large black shape beside a small blue one. The debate continued as institutional caution collided with the undeniable reality of the connection they had all witnessed. Tyler, who had remained quiet through most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "With all due respect," he said, his voice soft but firm, "while we're sitting here arguing, Atlas hasn't eaten since yesterday. He's refusing enrichment activities. He's positioned himself at the viewing glass and won't move." He looked directly at Dr. Wells. "In my 8 years working with him, I've never seen behavior like this." A heavy silence fell over the room. What are you suggesting? Dr. Wells asked. I'm saying we might need to consider this from an animal welfare perspective, not just human safety or scientific interest. Tyler straightened his shoulders. Atlas is forming an attachment, or reactivating one. Denying that could have consequences for his mental health. Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude for her colleague's insight. She'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't found the right words. Dr. Wells drummed his fingers on the table, then nodded sharply. All right, we proceed with the supervised interaction. Eleanor, you'll coordinate with Mrs. Harlow. Tyler, prepare the private viewing area and ensure Atlas is properly monitored. Doctor. Levine, I want you observing and ready to intervene if Mason shows any signs of distress. He turned to Janet. And make sure those waivers are ironclad. As the meeting dispersed, Eleanor hurried to the visitor lounge where Olivia sat anxiously while Mason drew pictures at a small table. It's approved, Eleanor announced, unable to keep the smile from her face. One session today with some conditions. Olivia released a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. Thank you, she whispered. Mason hasn't stopped talking about Atlas since yesterday. It's like something unlocked in him. Across the zoo, preparations were underway. The private interaction area, originally designed for the therapy program, was being readied. This space featured a lower, wider glass partition and comfortable seating on both sides. Most importantly, it was away from public viewing areas, offering privacy for what promised to be an emotionally charged reunion. Tyler worked inside Atlas's enclosure, an unusual step that required special authorization. The silverback watched him curiously, but remained focused on the entrance to the interaction area. Won't be long now, big guy, Tyler murmured as he adjusted the cameras that would document the session. He'd worked with Atlas for nearly 8 years, developing the deep respect that came from daily care of such an intelligent creature. Your little friend is coming back. By early afternoon, everything was in place. Dr. Wells gave a final inspection, his scientific mind still struggling with the implications of what they were facilitating. This goes against decades of zoo protocol, he muttered to Eleanor. Sometimes protocol needs to evolve, she replied quietly, just like our understanding of animal cognition. When Mason entered the interaction area, holding tightly to his mother's hand, a hush fell over the small group of staff members present. Doctor. Levine positioned herself discreetly in a corner, notepad ready. Janet Friedman stood near the exit, her legal concerns momentarily forgotten as she witnessed what was unfolding. Atlas was already waiting on the other side of the glass, his massive body perfectly still, except for his eyes, which tracked Mason's every movement. Mason approached without hesitation, as if drawn by an invisible thread. When he reached the glass, he sat down, cross-legged, just as he had the day before. Without prompting, he raised his small hand and pressed it against the barrier. Atlas moved with surprising gentleness for such an enormous creature. He extended his hand, nearly 5 times the size of Mason's, and placed it against the glass, perfectly aligned with the boy's. "Hello again," Mason said softly. And then, to the astonishment of everyone present, Atlas's lips moved. No sound penetrated the glass, but the shape was unmistakable, a silent greeting in return. Doctor. Wells gripped Eleanor's arm. Did he just— Yes, Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He remembers the lip movements too. They used to mirror each other's mouth shapes as part of their communication practice. As they watched, Mason began a series of hand movements, more complex than the simple tapping of the previous day. Atlas followed perfectly, their synchronized gestures creating a silent ballet of memory and recognition. In that moment, every rule they were breaking seemed inconsequential compared to the miracle they were witnessing. The boy who had forgotten was remembering through the silverback who never did. Mason sat before the glass, his small frame dwarfed by Atlas's massive silhouette. In the observation room behind them, adults whispered and cameras whirred, but neither boy nor gorilla seemed to notice. They existed in a world of their own making, reconnected across an impossible divide of time and species. Can you show me more of what we used to do? Mason asked, his voice clear in the hushed room. Atlas tilted his great head, dark eyes reflecting intelligence that still surprised even those who had worked with him for years. The silverback raised both hands, palms outward, then brought them together in a slow, deliberate clap. Once, twice, 3 times, then he paused, waiting. Without hesitation, Mason clapped in response, matching the rhythm perfectly. Then he added a 4th clap, his face breaking into a smile. It's like a game, he explained to his mother, who had edged closer. I add 1, then he adds 1. Sure enough, Atlas repeated the sequence with 5 claps. The pattern continued, both of them adding complexity with each round, a pause here, a quickened rhythm there. Dr. Levine scribbled notes furiously. Incredible, she murmured. He's demonstrating not just memory of specific patterns, but an understanding of the rule structure underlying the game. Eleanor stood beside Dr. Wells, both transfixed by the scene. The program records indicate they developed several interaction patterns. This clapping sequence was one of the first. Olivia watched her son with tears glistening in her eyes. I'd forgotten how much he loved these games, she whispered. After the program ended, he asked for his gorilla for weeks. Eventually, he stopped asking, and I thought he'd forgotten. Inside the interaction area, Mason had moved on to a new game. He raised both hands and wiggled his fingers, then quickly covered his eyes. Atlas immediately mimicked the action, his massive hands covering his eyes in a gorilla version of peekaboo. When they simultaneously dropped their hands, Mason burst into delighted laughter. I remember this, he exclaimed. We used to play this all the time. Dr. Wells turned to Eleanor, eyebrows raised. Is this conscious memory or muscle memory? Perhaps the distinction isn't as clear as we thought, she replied softly. The session continued for nearly 40 minutes. Mason seemed tireless, moving through game after game with Atlas. Sometimes he needed Eleanor to prompt him with suggestions from the program records, but more often his body seemed to remember what his conscious mind could not. For his part, Atlas remained completely engaged. The same gorilla who often ignored enrichment activities now participated with unwavering focus, his eyes rarely leaving Mason. We're witnessing something extraordinary here, Doctor Levine said, setting down her notepad. This goes beyond simple recognition or conditioned response. There's a genuine connection being re-established. Olivia had been watching silently, but now she approached Dr. Levine. After the accident, the therapists tried everything. Mason wouldn't speak, wouldn't engage. He was just absent. She looked back at her son, now showing Atlas a drawing he'd made. The first day we came to this program, he'd talked to Atlas. Not to me, not to the therapists, to Atlas. As if sensing he was being discussed, Mason looked over his shoulder. "Mum, can I show Atlas my scar?" Olivia nodded. Mason rolled up his sleeve, revealing a thin white line on his forearm, a minor injury from the accident that had taken his father's life. "I got this when Dad died," he explained to Atlas, pressing his arm against the glass. "I don't remember it hurting, but Mum says I was brave." Atlas leaned closer, examining the scar with gentle attention. Then, to everyone's amazement, the silverback turned his own massive arm, revealing a long-healed gash along his shoulder. He placed it against the glass parallel to Mason's scar. "He has one too," Mason said, wonder filling his voice. Eleanor quickly consulted her tablet. "From before he came to Brookfield," she confirmed. "An injury at his previous facility." "He's showing empathy," Dr. Levine whispered, demonstrating that he understands Mason's experience of injury. The moment hung in the air, fragile and profound. Then Mason asked a question that silenced everyone in the observation room. "Did Atlas miss me when I went away?" The adults exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. It was Tyler who stepped forward, kneeling beside Mason. "I think he did," he said honestly. "After the program ended, Atlas changed. He was quieter, less engaged." "Now I understand why." Mason nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something important. He turned back to Atlas and placed both palms flat against the glass. "I'm sorry I didn't come back," he said. "I didn't remember you, but you remembered me." Atlas pressed his huge hands against Mason's. For a long moment, they remained connected through the barrier that separated their worlds. Dr. Wells checked his watch reluctantly. "We should wrap up for today," he said quietly. "We don't want to overwhelm either of them." Eleanor moved to guide Mason away, but the boy resisted. "Can I say goodbye properly? We had a special way." Eleanor smiled. "Show us?" Mason stood, and Atlas immediately mirrored him. The boy tapped his chest twice, then waved. Atlas repeated the gesture with perfect accuracy, then added a gentle touch to the glass. "That means until next time," Mason explained with the certainty of remembered truth. "Not goodbye forever." As they finally prepared to leave, Mason turned back one last time. "I'll come back tomorrow, Atlas. I promise." And in the quiet of the observation room, not a single adult had the heart to tell him it might not be that simple. The video wasn't supposed to exist. Dr. Wells had been explicit. No recordings were to leave the private session. But in an age where everyone carried smartphones and information traveled at the speed of light, it was perhaps inevitable. 48 hours after Mason's reunion with Atlas, a shaky 20-second clip appeared on Twitter. a small boy and a silverback gorilla, hands pressed together through glass, performing a synchronized series of movements. The caption read, "Gorilla remembers boy from therapy program 6 years later." Brookfield Zoo, mind-blowing. By nightfall, the video had 5 million views. Eleanor's phone rang at 4:37 a.m. It was Dr. Wells, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Have you seen it? The video's everywhere." "Good morning, America wants a statement. National Geographic is calling. The zoo's switchboard crashed from the volume of calls." Eleanor sat up in bed, sleep evaporating instantly. "How did it leak?" Security footage shows a maintenance worker in the observation room. Apparently, he couldn't resist. Dr. Wells sighed heavily. "The board is convening an emergency meeting at 6. I need you there." By the time Eleanor arrived at the zoo, news vans lined the entrance. Security guards held back reporters, shouting questions at arriving staff. Inside the administrative building, the atmosphere was equally chaotic. "This is precisely what we wanted to avoid," Barbara Kenwood's voice carried down the hallway as Eleanor approached the boardroom. "A media circus that turns scientific observation into a spectacle." Eleanor slipped into the meeting, finding a seat beside Tyler. On the large screen at the front of the room, a news segment played silently. The leaked video now intercut with stock footage of gorillas and a banner reading, "Extraordinary Animal Memory. Gorilla recognizes child after years apart." Dr. Wells addressed the room, his usual academic composure strained. "We need a unified response strategy. Janet has prepared a statement emphasizing the preliminary nature of our observations and requesting privacy." "With all due respect," Eleanor interrupted, "that ship has sailed. This is resonating with people for a reason. It's an extraordinary example of cross-species connection and emotional memory." Barbara fixed her with a stern gaze. "And what happens when reporters start digging into the discontinued therapy program? The ethical questions about using endangered animals for human therapy? The liability issues?" Before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed. It was Olivia Harlow. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the hallway. "Olivia, are you all right?" "There are reporters outside our house." Olivia's voice trembled. "They woke us up knocking on the door. Mason's terrified." "How did they find us?" Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen." "Mason's school just called." "They're getting calls too. What should we do?" By mid-morning, the Harlows had been escorted to the zoo through a service entrance, away from the media gathered at the main gates. Mason sat quietly in Eleanor's office, his small shoulders hunched as he colored a picture of a gorilla. "He heard one of the reporters mention the accident," Olivia whispered to Eleanor by the door. "Now he's asking questions about his father that I'm not ready to answer." Dr. Levine joined them, closing the door softly. This publicity could be traumatic for Mason. He's reprocessing a significant loss while simultaneously reconnecting with a meaningful relationship from that period. And now it's all public. A knock interrupted them. Tyler stood there, his expression urgent. "You need to see this. Atlas is refusing to leave the interaction area. He won't eat, won't engage with enrichment. He's just waiting." Eleanor exchanged glances with Dr. Levine. Mason should see him, the psychologist said, for both their sakes. Navigating the zoo while avoiding cameras required elaborate planning. Using service corridors and staff-only paths, they finally reached the Great Ape House through a rear entrance. Mason broke into a run when he spotted Atlas through the glass. The silverback, who had been sitting motionless, immediately rose to his full height, a rumbling sound of recognition vibrating from his chest. "He was waiting for me," Mason said, pressing his palms against the glass. Atlas mirrored him instantly. Tyler checked his monitoring equipment. "His heart rate just decreased by 15 beats per minute," he reported quietly. He was stressed, and now he's calming. For 20 minutes, Mason and Atlas communicated through their silent language of gestures and expressions, oblivious to the adults watching and the world's growing fascination with their connection. Eventually, Dr. Wells joined them, his face grave. "The board has made a decision," he told Eleanor and Olivia quietly. "We're going to control the narrative. One official interview with carefully selected press, one authorized video release, and most importantly, regulated, documented continuation of Mason and Atlas's sessions." Olivia's eyes widened. "You're allowing them to continue meeting? With conditions, Dr. Wells clarified. "Twice weekly, under observation, as part of a formal research study on cross-species emotional memory. Dr. Levine will monitor Mason's psychological well-being throughout." Eleanor couldn't hold back her smile. "And Atlas?" "Tyler will monitor his health markers. If at any point either of them shows signs of distress, we re-evaluate." Dr. Wells watched Mason and Atlas, his scientific reserve softening slightly. "The board realizes this is unprecedented, but so is this connection." That evening, Olivia sat Mason down in their living room, news notifications muted on her phone. "People are very interested in you and Atlas," she explained gently. Mason nodded. "Because he remembered me when I didn't remember him?" "Yes." Olivia hesitated. "Some people might ask you questions about Atlas, about the accident, about Dad." "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to." Mason considered this, his young face serious. "I think I want to remember more," he said finally, "about Dad and about Atlas." "Maybe Atlas can help me remember." Outside their window, a news van drove slowly past, hunting for the story that had captured the world's imagination. Inside, a mother and son began the delicate process of excavating memories long buried, some painful, some healing, all part of their shared history. And across town, a silverback gorilla slept peacefully for the first time in days, his massive body curled toward the glass where his young friend would return. Dr. Amelia Chen stepped into Brookfield Zoo's research center with the careful deliberation of someone accustomed to entering unfamiliar territory. Her reputation as one of the country's foremost neuroscientists specializing in memory formation had preceded her. The zoo had called her in as a consultant on what was rapidly becoming known in scientific circles as the Atlas Study. "Dr. Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice." Dr. Wells extended his hand. "Your work on trauma-affected memory in children made you our first choice." Amelia nodded, her keen eyes taking in the observation room where Eleanor, Tyler, and Dr. Levine waited with tablets and notebooks. Through the one-way glass, she could see Mason and Atlas engaged in what appeared to be a complex game involving shapes drawn on a whiteboard. "I've reviewed the footage you sent," she said, setting down her leather briefcase, "and read the background materials. But I have to say, seeing it in person is something else entirely." On the other side of the glass, Mason drew a circle, then a square inside it. Atlas, watching intently, picked up a marker with surprising dexterity and replicated the pattern on his own board. "They've been at this for 20 minutes, Eleanor explained. "It was part of their original communication development." Mason draws, Atlas copies, then elaborates. They build increasingly complex patterns together. Dr. Chen moved closer to the glass. "And Mason has no conscious memory of learning this. He says it feels familiar, like remembering the rules to a game he used to play but can't quite place," Dr. Levine replied. "What we're seeing appears to be procedural memory functioning independently of declarative memory." "Fascinating." Dr. Chen pulled a small recorder from her pocket. "Mind if I document my observations?" In the interaction area, Mason had moved on to a new activity. He was showing Atlas a photograph, a man with sandy hair and blue eyes, similar to Mason's, holding a toddler version of himself on his shoulders. "That's my dad," they heard Mason explain through the monitoring system. "I don't remember him much, but Mum gave me this picture." Atlas studied the photograph with remarkable focus, then gently touched the image of young Mason through the glass. "He recognizes you as a child," Eleanor whispered, though only the humans in the observation room could hear her. Dr. Chen watched, utterly engrossed. The implications for our understanding of great ape cognition are staggering. Long-term memory of specific individuals is documented, but this level of contextual memory, recognizing a child as both his younger self and current self, suggests a sophisticated understanding of identity permanence. Dr. Wells nodded. "We've been so focused on the human side, Mason's amnesia and recovery, that we're only beginning to appreciate what this tells us about Atlas's cognitive capabilities." The discussion continued as the scientists observed, each bringing their specialized knowledge to bear on the extraordinary interaction playing out before them. Dr. Chen explained the neuroscience of childhood memory formation, particularly how trauma could create discontinuities in autobiographical memory. Children. Mason's age during the accident typically don't form lasting conscious memories, she explained. Add trauma to that, and the normal childhood amnesia becomes more pronounced. But procedural memory, how to do things, operates through different neural pathways than autobiographical memory. What happened to us? Dr. Levine nodded. That's why he remembers the games but not learning them. Exactly. His body remembers even if his conscious mind doesn't. Dr. Chen turned back to the glass. But what's truly remarkable is how Atlas is serving as a bridge to those inaccessible memories. Inside the interaction area, Mason had begun tapping out a rhythm against the glass, the same pattern that had marked their first reconnection. As Atlas responded, Mason closed his eyes, his small face scrunched in concentration. "I remember dark," he said suddenly. And it was raining. Atlas was there, but different. Eleanor quickly consulted her tablet. The therapy sessions were conducted in reduced lighting to help Mason feel more secure. And there was a sound machine that played rainfall sounds. Dr. Chen leaned forward. He's retrieving contextual memory fragments. The session continued for another 20 minutes before Dr. Levine signaled that Mason was showing signs of fatigue. As Mason prepared to leave, Atlas performed their special goodbye gesture, adding a new element, a gentle touch to his own heart, before touching the glass. After Mason had been escorted back to Eleanor's office where Olivia waited, the scientists gathered to compare notes. "I'd like to propose a formal study," Dr. Chen said, arranging her materials precisely before her. "With proper permissions and ethical oversight, of course. This could advance our understanding of both human and great ape memory systems." Dr. Wells looked relieved. "Having your expertise would lend considerable credibility to what we're observing." "I've drafted a preliminary protocol," Dr. Chen continued, distributing tablets with her proposal. Non-invasive monitoring, structured interaction sessions, careful documentation of emergent memories and behaviors. As they discussed methodology and research design, Tyler interrupted gently. "Dr. Chen, you've explained how this might help us understand memory, but could it help Mason? Could reconnecting with Atlas actually help him recover memories of his father?" Dr. Chen considered the question carefully. "Memory isn't like a video recording that we retrieve intact. It's reconstructive, assembled from fragments each time we recall it." She tapped her finger thoughtfully on the table. "Atlas represents a unique memory trigger for Mason, a connection to a period of his life that's otherwise inaccessible. Through their interactions, he may not recover complete memories, but he might reconstruct meaningful emotional connections to his past." Tyler nodded, satisfied. "That's what matters most to him, I think." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor received a text from Olivia. Mason drew this after the session. The attached photo showed a crayon drawing of a man holding a small boy's hand, standing before what appeared to be a gorilla behind glass. "It's begun," Eleanor said, showing the others. "He's starting to remember." Rain drummed against the windows of Dr. Levine's office. Olivia Harlow sat with her hands tightly clasped in her lap, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "It was raining that night too," she said. "April 12th, 2018. David was driving Mason home from his swim lesson. They were 3 blocks from our house when the truck ran the red light." Dr. Levine nodded gently, giving Olivia space to continue at her own pace. Eleanor sat quietly in the corner, present at Olivia's request, as they pieced together the events that had led Mason to the original therapy program. The police said David never had time to react. His side took the full impact. Olivia's voice remained flat, as if emotional distance was the only way she could revisit these memories. Mason was in his car seat on the passenger side. Physically, he just had the small cut on his arm. But he was there for almost 40 minutes before they could safely get him out. Eleanor felt a chill. He was trapped in the car with his father? Olivia nodded. "David died instantly, thank God. But Mason just sat there not making a sound. When the emergency workers finally got him out, he still didn't cry, didn't speak." Her voice cracked slightly. He didn't say a single word for 3 months after that. Outside, the rain intensified, echoing the somber mood within the room. For the past 2 weeks, Mason had been meeting with Atlas twice weekly under the carefully structured protocols of Dr. Chen's study. With each session, fragments of memory seemed to be surfacing, disconnected pieces of a puzzle neither Mason nor his mother fully understood. Yesterday, he asked me if his dad liked gorillas, Olivia continued. I didn't know what to say. David and I took him to the zoo for his 2nd birthday, but Mason was too young to remember that. Dr. Levine made a note. Mason's brain is trying to create connections, integrate his emerging memories with what he knows about his life. But why Atlas? Olivia asked. Of all the things he could remember, why is this connection so strong when memories of his own father are still so fragmented? Eleanor had been wondering the same thing. After their session yesterday, she'd spent hours reviewing the original program records, seeking answers. The therapy program was quite innovative for its time, she explained, opening her tablet to share her findings. It was designed specifically for children with trauma-induced selective mutism. The theory was that non-verbal communication with another species might create a safe space for expression without the pressure of human interaction. She showed them a photograph of toddler Mason, his face solemn, sitting before Atlas. Mason was among the first children selected. According to these notes, he showed an immediate affinity for Atlas. I remember the first day, Olivia said softly. Mason had been silent for so long. The therapist, Dr. Kaplan, I think, suggested we try something unconventional. I was desperate enough to try anything. Dr. Levine nodded. According to the records, Mason spoke his first post-accident word during his 3rd session with Atlas. Safe, Olivia whispered. He said safe. I collapsed in tears right there. Eleanor continued scrolling through the file. The program ran for 6 months before it was discontinued. Budget cuts primarily. The therapy showed promising results, but it was expensive to maintain and difficult to scale. Then my mother got sick, Olivia added. We moved to Cleveland to care for her. I tried to tell Mason we were saying goodbye to Atlas, but he was still using so few words. I thought children were resilient, that he'd forget and move on. Doctor. Levine leaned forward. Children are resilient, but significant emotional connections aren't simply erased, even when conscious memory fades. Mason's bond with Atlas formed during an extremely vulnerable period, when his sense of safety had been shattered. Atlas became safety for him, Eleanor realized. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tyler entered, his expression unusually animated. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should see this immediately. He handed Eleanor a tablet displaying Atlas's latest cognitive assessment. We've been tracking his problem-solving skills before and after Mason's return. His performance has improved by nearly 30%. Eleanor studied the data with growing amazement. It's like his entire cognitive function has been enhanced by their reconnection. Dr. Levine turned to Olivia. This relationship appears to be mutually beneficial in ways we're only beginning to understand. Later that afternoon, Mason sat cross-legged before the glass in the interaction area, carefully arranging a set of family photographs. Atlas watched with intense focus from his side. "This is my dad," Mason explained, pointing to a wedding photo. "His name was David. Mom says I look like him." Atlas studied the image, then gently touched the glass above it. "And this is me when I was little," Mason continued, showing a toddler's birthday picture. "Before I knew you." Eleanor observed from the corner, fascinated by Mason's initiative. These photo shares hadn't been part of the planned protocol, but Dr. Chen had encouraged following the boy's lead. "Mom says we came here for my birthday once, but I don't remember," Mason told Atlas. "Did you see me then?" "Before we became friends?" Atlas made no specific gesture in response, but his steady gaze remained fixed on Mason's face. "I had a dream last night," Mason said suddenly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "about the rain and the dark. Dad was there, but I couldn't wake him up." His small fingers traced patterns on the glass. "Were you there too, Atlas? In the dark time?" Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Mason was conflating memories, the rainy night of the accident with the dimly lit therapy sessions where rainfall sounds played in the background. Atlas moved closer to the glass, his massive form gentle despite its power. He placed his palm against the barrier, and Mason immediately matched it with his own much smaller hand. "I think you helped me not be scared," Mason said with the simple clarity of childhood, "when everything was dark and rainy and Dad wouldn't wake up." And in the quiet of that moment, Eleanor understood what the science alone couldn't fully explain: how a silverback gorilla had become the anchor for a traumatized child's sense of safety in a world suddenly rendered chaotic and frightening. Atlas had never been in that car on that rainy night. But in Mason's reconstructed memory landscape, the gorilla who had helped him find his voice again had somehow become interwoven with his darkest hour, offering retroactive comfort to a terrified child trapped in silence. 4 weeks into what the staff now called the Reconnection Program, the private interaction area had evolved. A child-sized table and chairs sat on Mason's side of the glass. Atlas's space featured cushioned platforms at varying heights, allowing him to position himself comfortably at Mason's eye level. The sterile research environment had gradually transformed into something warmer, more conducive to their unique communication. Today marked their 8th session, now a Tuesday and Friday ritual that both Mason and Atlas seemed to anticipate with equal enthusiasm. Eleanor checked her watch as Olivia helped Mason arrange his materials: colored markers, paper, and a small photo album he'd assembled with his mother's help. "How's he doing at school?" Eleanor asked Olivia quietly. "Better," Olivia replied, watching Mason organize his markers by color. "His teacher says he's participating more in class discussions, and he made a friend, a boy named Ethan, who saw him on the news and thought it was cool that he talks to gorillas." Dr. Chen entered the observation room, tablet in hand. "Sorry I'm late. The interview with Scientific American ran long." She glanced through the glass where Mason was already engaged with Atlas, showing him a drawing. "Have they started the cognitive sequence yet?" "Not yet," Eleanor replied. "Mason brought something new today." Inside the interaction area, Mason held up a crayon drawing of a car with 2 stick figures inside. "This is what I remember about the accident," he explained to Atlas. It's not much, just shadows and rain. Atlas studied the drawing with intense focus, his dark eyes moving methodically across the page. Then, with deliberate care, he selected a black marker from his side and drew a series of vertical lines on his whiteboard, a visual representation of rain. "Yes!" Mason exclaimed. "It was raining hard, just like that." Doctor. Chen made a note. "Remarkable. He's not just mirroring now, he's extending the conversation." Tyler, monitoring Atlas's vital signs, nodded in agreement. His cognitive engagement readings are off the charts today. Mason continued sharing drawings, crude but expressive renditions of fragmented memories. Atlas responded to each one, sometimes with simple mirroring, other times with his own interpretive additions. "I'm beginning to think we've been conceptualizing this all wrong," Dr. Chen said quietly to the observation team. "We've been so focused on how Atlas is helping Mason recover memories. But what we're witnessing is more collaborative. They're constructing a shared narrative together." Dr. Levine nodded. "Memory isn't just recovered, it's reconstructed. Atlas is helping Mason build a coherent story out of fragments." The session progressed through their standard cognitive exercises, pattern recognition, sequencing games, memory tests, all wrapped in the playful interaction that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Atlas's performance continued to impress the research team, his problem-solving abilities now consistently exceeding his pre-reconnection baseline. Near the end of their hour together, Mason introduced something new. "I brought music today," he announced, looking to Eleanor for permission. She nodded, and he pressed play on a small speaker. Gentle piano notes filled the room, a lullaby. Atlas tilted his head, listening. "Mom says my dad used to play this for me before bed," Mason explained. "I don't remember it, but it makes me feel happy and sad at the same time." Atlas moved closer to the glass, his breathing slow and steady. As the melody continued, he began to sway gently, a rhythmic rocking motion that matched the music's cadence. "He's responding to the emotional content," Dr. Chen whispered, fascinated. Mason's eyes widened. "You like it too," he said to Atlas. Then, to everyone's surprise, the boy began to hum along with the melody, his small voice blending with the piano. Atlas continued his gentle swaying. When the song ended, he remained still for a moment, then tapped the glass, once, twice, 3 times, their original connection pattern. Mason smiled and tapped back. "That was my dad's favorite song," he said, though he couldn't possibly remember this fact himself. It was information Olivia must have shared, now integrated into his reconstructed narrative. As their session concluded with their special goodbye ritual, Dr. Wells entered the observation room. "The board reviewed our progress report," he announced to the research team. "They've approved the program's continuation through the end of the year, with quarterly reassessments." Relief spread through the room. What had begun as a crisis management response to an unexpected viral moment had evolved into something more meaningful, a pioneering study in cross-species emotional memory with potential applications for trauma recovery. "There's something else," Dr. Wells continued, his tone shifting. We've received inquiries from 3 other zoological institutions with great ape programs interested in exploring similar therapeutic applications. And the Children's Trauma Center downtown has reached out about potential collaboration. Eleanor felt a mix of pride and protectiveness. Mason and Atlas aren't just research subjects. Their connection is unique, personal. "I understand," Dr. Wells assured her, "which is why any expansion would be entirely separate. What they've shown us might help others, but their relationship remains their own." Later, as Olivia and Mason prepared to leave, Eleanor walked them to their car, now a necessary precaution to avoid the occasional photographer still hoping for a glimpse of the gorilla boy, as some tabloids had dubbed him. "He drew this for Atlas tomorrow," Mason said, handing Eleanor a carefully folded paper. "Can you give it to him? It's a surprise." Eleanor accepted the drawing with appropriate solemnity. "I promise." That evening, after most staff had departed, Eleanor returned to the great ape house. Atlas sat near the viewing glass, seemingly lost in thought. She approached quietly and unfolded Mason's drawing where Atlas could see it. A colourful scene showing a boy and a gorilla sitting together, no glass between them, beneath a bright sun. "He misses you between visits," Eleanor said softly, though she knew Atlas couldn't understand her words. "You've given him something none of us could." Atlas studied the drawing, then gently touched the 2 figures with one massive finger. He looked up at Eleanor, his expression impossible to fully interpret through the lens of human understanding, yet somehow conveying an unmistakable emotional depth. For a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to wonder who was healing whom. The first snowfall of winter dusted Brookfield Zoo in pristine white. 3 months had passed since Mason and Atlas's reconnection, 3 months of twice-weekly sessions, careful documentation, and remarkable progress for both boy and gorilla. What had begun as a scientific curiosity had evolved into something the research team now recognized as profoundly meaningful for all involved. Eleanor arrived early that Friday morning, her breath visible in the December air as she hurried through the employee entrance. She'd received an urgent text from Tyler at 5:38 a.m. "Atlas not eating. Acting lethargic. Come when you can." Her heart raced as she badged through security doors, making her way quickly to the great ape house. Tyler met her at the staff entrance, his face drawn with concern. "He refused breakfast," Tyler reported, leading her to the monitoring station. "His temperature's elevated, 100.3. Dr. Martinez is on her way." Through the observation window, Eleanor could see Atlas lying on his side, his massive chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The silverback, who had been so engaged, so present during recent months, now seemed diminished somehow. "Have you called Dr. Wells?" she asked, not taking her eyes off Atlas. "He's in a board meeting. They're discussing the program expansion." Tyler hesitated. "Should we cancel Mason's session today?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Mason had become deeply invested in his relationship with Atlas. Each session built upon the last, strengthening both his emerging memories and his emotional resilience. Cancelling would disappoint him terribly. "Let's wait for Dr. Martinez's assessment," she decided. Dr. Sophia Martinez, the zoo's head veterinarian, arrived within the hour, medical team in tow. Her examination was thorough but inconclusive. "It could be several things," she explained afterward. "Respiratory infection, mild flu. Gorillas are susceptible to many of the same viruses as humans. We've started him on antibiotics as a precaution, but we need to monitor him closely." "Will he be well enough for Mason's session this afternoon?" Eleanor asked. Dr. Martinez frowned. "I'd recommend cancelling. Atlas needs rest, and we don't want to risk exposing the boy to anything communicable." Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy as she made the necessary calls. Olivia answered on the second ring. "Mason's been talking about today's session all week," she said after Eleanor explained the situation. "He made something special for Atlas." "I'm sorry," Eleanor replied. "Atlas isn't well. It's likely just a minor infection, but—" "Can Mason see him anyway?" Olivia interrupted. "Not interact, just see him." "He'll worry otherwise." Eleanor hesitated, torn between protocol and compassion. "Let me talk to Dr. Wells." Convincing doctor. Wells required careful negotiation, but eventually he agreed to a brief, distanced visit. Mason could view Atlas from the regular visitor area with no direct interaction session. When Mason arrived that afternoon, clutching a colorful handmade card, Eleanor prepared him gently. "Atlas isn't feeling well today, so we can't have your regular session. But you can see him for a few minutes from the viewing area." Mason's face fell, but he nodded bravely. "Is he going to be okay?" "The veterinarians are taking good care of him," Eleanor assured him, leading the way to the great ape house. The public area was closed for maintenance, ensuring privacy. When they reached the large viewing window, Mason pressed his face close to the glass, searching for his friend. Atlas lay on his side on a bed of straw, his back to them. Even from this distance, his labored breathing was evident. "Atlas?" Mason called, his small voice muffled by the thick glass. "Atlas, it's me!" For several moments, nothing happened. Then, with obvious effort, the silverback shifted, turning toward the sound of Mason's voice. His movements were slow, lacking his usual fluid grace. "He's sick," Mason whispered, his eyes wide with concern. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, but he's getting medicine to help him feel better." Mason placed his palm against the glass, their familiar greeting. "He's too tired to come to the glass." "That's right," Eleanor confirmed. "He needs to rest." What happened next took Eleanor completely by surprise. Mason turned to her with sudden determination. "Can I go closer? Please. Not to play games or anything, just to sit with him." "Mason, that's not possible. The protocols—" "Please," he repeated, his blue eyes intense with purpose. "Atlas came to me when I needed him. Now he needs me." Eleanor hesitated, protocol and compassion warring within her. She thought of the progress they'd documented, the trust that had developed, the profound connection that defied scientific explanation. "Wait here," she said finally. 20 minutes later, after hasty consultations with Dr. Wells, Dr. Martinez, and security, Mason sat quietly in the private interaction area. Atlas remained on his bed of straw, too weak to move to the glass, but his eyes were fixed on the boy. "It's okay," Mason said softly. You don't have to get up. I'll stay here. He pressed his hand to the glass, then opened the card he'd made, holding it up for Atlas to see. The front showed a colourful drawing of Atlas, standing tall and strong. Inside, Mason had written in careful letters, "Get well soon." Mum says when you're sick, sometimes just having someone sit with you helps you feel better, Mason explained. So I'll stay right here. For the next hour, Mason simply sat with Atlas, sometimes talking softly, sometimes just being present. The silverback's eyes remained on him, watchful and aware despite his illness. Dr. Martinez checked Atlas's vitals periodically, noting with cautious optimism that his heart rate had stabilized. "It's remarkable," she murmured to Eleanor. "His stress indicators are decreasing, even though he's physically uncomfortable." "He knows Mason is here for him," Eleanor replied softly. As their visit concluded, Mason placed his card against the glass. "I'll come back when you're feeling better," he promised. "You helped me when I was sad, and now I'm helping you." 3 days later, Atlas's condition improved dramatically. His fever broke, his appetite returned, and he began moving around his enclosure with increasing energy. "The antibiotics worked," Dr. Martinez noted with professional satisfaction during her final check. Tyler, who had maintained a near-constant vigil, smiled knowingly. "The medicine helped," he agreed. "But I think Mason's visit was the turning point." Eleanor wasn't sure what she believed anymore, where science ended and something less definable began. She only knew that the bridge between boy and gorilla had become a two-way street of healing, challenging everything she thought she understood about connection, memory, and the capacity for complex emotional bonds that transcended species. When Mason returned for their next regular session, Atlas was waiting at the glass, completely recovered and visibly eager to resume their special friendship that existed beyond words. 1 year after Mason's hand first pressed against the glass at Brookfield Zoo, spring sunshine warmed the newly installed Connection Garden outside the Great Ape House. A small crowd gathered around a modest plaque being unveiled by a now 8-year-old Mason Harlow, his sandy hair catching golden highlights in the afternoon light. "I declare the Connection program officially open," he announced, his voice clear and confident as he pulled away the covering cloth. Applause rippled through the audience. Zoo staff, board members, researchers, and the first families selected to participate in what had become Brookfield's groundbreaking initiative. The plaque read, "Where memory builds bridges across species, inspired by Mason and Atlas, Dr." Marcus Wells stepped forward, looking far more relaxed than he had a year ago when faced with an unprecedented situation and viral video. "Thank you all for joining us today to celebrate not just a program, but a profound discovery about connection, memory, and healing." Eleanor Reynolds watched from the side, pride swelling in her chest. The past year had transformed so many lives, none more than Mason's, but her own included. What had begun as a scientific curiosity had evolved into her life's work. After the ceremony, Mason led the first tour of the new facility for the waiting families, children with various trauma-related conditions and their parents. Wearing his junior volunteer vest with obvious pride, he guided them through the specially designed interaction spaces. "This is where you'll meet your animal friends," he explained, gesturing to the private rooms with their specialized glass partitions. "They don't talk like people do, but they listen in a different way." Eleanor fell into step beside Olivia, who watched her son with glistening eyes. "I never imagined this," Olivia said softly. "A year ago, he could barely make eye contact with other children. Now look at him." Indeed, Mason had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. His school reports showed dramatic improvement, not just academically, but socially. The boy who once struggled to connect with peers now possessed a quiet confidence and emotional intelligence that drew others to him. "How's the support group going?" Eleanor asked. Olivia smiled. "Growing every month. Parents need to talk about these experiences too, you know. Understanding trauma from a child's perspective changes everything." She had become the coordinator for a monthly gathering of parents whose children were participating in animal-assisted therapy, her own healing journey finding purpose in helping others. Inside the great ape house, Atlas watched from his newly expanded habitat. At 16, the silverback had become something of a celebrity, though the zoo carefully managed his public exposure. More importantly, he had become the cornerstone of the Connection program, working with specially trained staff to interact with children who reminded Eleanor of Mason a year ago. Quiet, withdrawn, locked in private worlds of trauma. Dr. Amelia Chen's research had garnered international attention. Her paper, Cross-Species Emotional Memory and Trauma Recovery, published in a prestigious journal, had sparked debate and innovation in both animal cognition studies and childhood trauma treatment. Later that afternoon, after the crowds dispersed and the celebratory cake had been reduced to crumbs, Mason had his regular private session with Atlas. Though no longer part of a formal study, their twice-weekly meetings continued, a permanent arrangement the board had approved unanimously. Eleanor observed from her usual spot as Mason settled before the glass, arranging photographs in what had become their familiar ritual. "I brought new pictures today," he told Atlas, who sat attentively on the other side. "This is from my school play. I was the narrator." He showed a photo of himself on stage, looking comfortable in the spotlight. Atlas studied the image, then made a gesture they had developed together, a gentle pat on his chest that Mason interpreted as approval. "And this one is really special," Mason continued, revealing a framed photograph of a smiling man with sandy hair and blue eyes identical to Mason's. "It's Dad's birthday today. He would have been 40. Olivia had shared with Eleanor how Mason had recently begun asking more questions about his father, not just facts, but stories, preferences, the small details that made David Harlow a person rather than just a tragic absence. "I remember some things now," Mason told Atlas, his voice thoughtful. "Not the accident much, but other stuff. Dad teaching me to swim, his laugh, the way he'd carry me on his shoulders." Atlas watched intently, his dark eyes fixed on Mason's face, with what Eleanor had come to recognize as genuine empathy, something the scientific literature once insisted great apes couldn't feel across species lines. "Dr. Chen says you helped me find pathways to my memories," Mason continued, using vocabulary he'd absorbed from the scientists around him, like a bridge to before. Atlas reached out one massive hand, placing it gently against the glass. Mason matched the gesture immediately, their palms aligned as they had been that very first day, the small human hand against the enormous gorilla one. "Mum says we're moving to a house closer to the zoo," Mason shared, "so I can keep volunteering and seeing you, even when I start middle school next year." As their session concluded, Mason performed their special goodbye gesture, which had evolved over time to include elements unique to their journey together. Atlas mirrored it perfectly, then added something new, a gentle touch to his heart, followed by 2 taps on the glass. "I love you too," Mason said simply. Eleanor walked Mason back to the main entrance where Olivia waited. The boy carried himself differently now, grounded, present, no longer fragments trying to form a whole. "See you Friday, Eleanor," he called as they departed. Eleanor returned to her office, where photographs chronicled the remarkable year. Mason and Atlas in various stages of their journey, news clippings, research milestones. A drawing Mason had made hung framed on the wall, a boy and a gorilla with a golden thread connecting their hearts. As she prepared her final notes for the day, Eleanor reflected on the mystery at the center of it all. How a gorilla's memory had preserved what a child's could not, creating space for healing that nothing else had reached. Some connections, she had learned, transcend explanation. Some memories never fade, even when they're held for us by unlikely guardians. And sometimes the deepest understanding passes not through words, but through the silent language of presence, spanning time and species with the simplest message of all. You are not alone. You are remembered. You are safe. Outside her window, the sun set over Brookfield Zoo, where a boy had found his past and a gorilla had shaped the future. 2 lives forever changed by a memory that never faded. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.